Well, this past Tuesday, a number of states held off year elections. There were much anticipated contests in California with Proposition 50, the temporary redistricting issue, the New York mayor's race between Zohran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo. You had governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia. Uh, Mary Sheffield elected as Detroit's first female mayor. Many will tell you Democrats had a really big night. But what are we to make of this? How does it portend for the 2026 midterms, and does it signal anything for the 2028 presidential contest? Well, let's talk with my next guest. He's an American historian who holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, one of the most prolific writers of our time. Yes, sir. Did I make a mistake? Oh, a wonderful human being. I know I'm right on that point. His latest book is The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, sir, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to be sure that I didn't make a mistake. Let me just a quick question about the book. The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Why that specific time period?
That specific time period because it covers the origins of the nation's capital up into the abolition of slavery, number one. Number two, it reinforces the idea that the United States, the early republic, was a paradise for enslavers and a living hell for Africans, for example, which contrasts with oftentimes repeated opinions, which I'm afraid to say will probably gain further currency when Ken Burns unveils his multi-part series on PBS about the so-called American Revolution. Given the fact that most of the Supreme Court justices were enslavers, most of the U.S. presidents before 1865 were enslavers, the fact that you had a substantial free Negro population in neighboring Baltimore that the enslavers tried to ship across the Atlantic to form Liberia, it puts paid to these romanticized notions about the origins of this country, and to come full circle allows us to better understand what occurred on this past Tuesday.
Well, and as we get to that, let me just say, folks, this book um, is phenomenal. If you're really looking to give a gift over the holidays, gifting this book, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865, would be a phenomenal gift. And if I may offer a compliment to that, is Dr. Clarence Lusane's The Black History of the White House. Dr. Lusane's The Black History of the White House is another phenomenal, I think would be an exceptional parallel read to Dr. Horne's The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Dr. Horne, before the election this past Tuesday, a lot of analysts and others, they were preparing to discuss an anticipated split outcome. They were preparing, what does it mean if Dems win in Virginia but lose in New Jersey, or they lose in New York but win New Jersey and Virginia, et cetera? Many of them were trying to figure out how they were going to be able to parse their analysis if there was a split outcome. But it was a sweep. It was a flat thumping, if not ass whooping. Your thoughts on the results of Tuesday night?
Well, it reveals a number of points that should have been recognized. That is to say, that Mr. Trump will have little difficulty in satisfying the billionaire base, or to speak of Elon Musk, the trillionaire base of his coalition. But it's going to be very difficult to satisfy the working class base of his constituency, particularly since Mr. Trump is obviously out of touch on the premier issue of affordability, which of course brings us to Z. Kwame Mamdani, who from the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, which received 50% plus of the votes in his triumphant victory in New York City. But before we uncork the champagne bottles, we need to look more carefully at that victory. That is to say that Mr. Mamdani did not prevail in Staten Island,
Mm-hmm.
which is the working class base, settler descendant working class base of New York City, a Republican constituency, to be sure, heavily comprised of Italian American, Irish American, and Jewish American workers and middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And he also did not prevail on the Upper East Side of Manhattan from 59th to 96th Street, where the 1% disproportionately reside. I'm speaking not only of the 1% of New York, but the United States and perhaps even this entire planet. And that ungainly coalition between the working class base in Staten Island and the 1% on the Upper East Side of Manhattan has been a very powerful locomotive, helping to found this nation in the first instance in 1776, helping to lead to an exponential increase in the African slave trade and decades there following, leading to a dispossession massively of the indigenous population. And I don't think that that coalition, which has had so much success, is going to throw in the towel. In fact, look at the recent comments of Steve Bannon, the former advisor to Mr. Trump. He suggests that if the Republicans do not put their foot on the accelerator, they will be facing prison or worse in 2028, 2029, and 2030. And I think he has a point. And so I don't expect that lesson of defeat to be absorbed by the Republicans. After all, they don't respect electoral majorities. Let your mind reel back to January 6, 2021, the attempted overthrow of the presidential election. So our work is cut out for us. And Mr. Mamdani has made a fateful concession already by allowing Jessica Tisch, a card-carrying member of the 1%, to continue as police commissioner. Recall that it was the New York Police Department that sabotaged the first Black mayor of New York, David Dinkins, that tried to sabotage Bill de Blasio, who, of course, was forced to observe term limits, unlike Mr. Trump, and was followed by the utterly corrupt Eric Adams. And Jessica Tisch, of course, not only represents that coalition between the 1% and the settler descendant working class, but she wants to hire 5,000 more cops. At a time when the NYPD is terribly bloated, 37,000 cops on the beat. Los Angeles, which has a substantially larger geography to patrol, has 8 or 9,000 police on the beat. Not only that, but Mr. Mamdani said one of his major reforms is to hire more civilians in the NYPD to handle domestic violence disputes, to handle mental health crises, which makes sense because it's a recipe for catastrophe to send a man with a gun into a household. That will be basically opposed, it seems to me, by Jessica Tisch. So our work is cut out for us. Uncork the champagne bottles, but sip, do not guzzle.
Uncork the champagne bottles, but sip, do not guzzle. That, thank you. That was true, Dr. Gerald Horne. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at 13. We're at 13 past the hour. Dr. Wilmer Leon here. Inside the Issues is where you are, Sirius XM 126 Urban View. My guest is Dr. Gerald Horne. His latest book, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. But we're doing some analysis. We're unpacking the knapsack, and so to speak, and as Gary Flowers would say. And on the Tuesday off year, and folks, these weren't even midterm elections. These were off year elections, and that wound up having some significant resonance going forward. This is Ron Jack Ruba from Gonzalo Rubalcaba's Skyline album, 2021, Five Passion Records. That's Ron Carter. That man on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, the late great, he just passed last Sunday, and Gonzalo Rubalcaba on piano. Do yourselves a favor, keep it locked right here. Sirius XM 126 Urban View. 17 past the hour. Dr. Wilmer Leon here, and Inside the Issues is where you are, Sirius XM 126 Urban View, and that's Ron Jack Ruba from Gonzalo Rubalcaba's Skyline 2021 Five Passion Records. That man, Ron Carter, on bass, Jack, the late Jack Dejonet on drums, Gonzalo Rubalcaba on piano leading the date. Dr. Gerald Horne is my guest. His latest is The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. And again, folks, we are getting close to the holiday season. And, this just popped into my head. To those that are saying that the African American community should boycott buying on the holidays, I won't debate that in the least. That would be a phenomenal message to send. But let me add a caveat to that. Buy literature written and give literature written by Black thinkers, by Black authors, such as Dr. Gerald Horne, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Give the gift of wisdom. And again, another compliment to that book, I believe, is Dr. Clarence Lusane's The Black History of the White House. With that, Gerald, thank you so much for staying with me. And one of the elements of the results from Tuesday that I don't think is getting enough attention or analysis is turnout. This was an off-year election, not even a midterm, but an off-year election when historically or traditionally maybe 15, 16 people on a good year, 17 people will go to the polls. There was record turnout in Virginia. There was record turnout in New Jersey, record turnout in New York. Your thoughts, is that a data point that needs to be recognized, or am I making more of something that really isn't relevant?
Absolutely, it needs to be recognized. What the Republicans need to understand is that Mr. Trump has been a turnout engine, not only for their party, but I'm afraid to say, from their point of view, from the opposition, the Democrats. He drives people to the polls. The people walked to the polls and drove to the polls in order to cast a vote against Mr. Trump, irrespective of the contests and participants. The second point is that even though some of our friends on the left like to deny this obvious point, Mr. Trump has a working class settler descendant base. You have people on the left who say that he has no working class support whatsoever.
That's insane.
Sorry?
To say that is insane.
It absolutely is. I'm talking about otherwise intelligent people, or presumably intelligent people, I should say. The problem with that kind of base is that oftentimes it does not turn out. And that was the case this past Tuesday. And I think one of the most telling elections, and you probably have insight with regard to this, is in Virginia, the Cavalier state, where Jay Jones, a Black American, prevailed rather handily.
Yes.
After threatening to kill a powerful white man and his children and comparing him to Hitler and Pol Pot, the mastermind of the genocide in Cambodia some years ago. That I find almost mind-boggling. And then Mr. Mamdani receiving more than 1 million votes in Gotham. Here we have a socialist prevailing in the capital of finance. In a sense, as I pointed out before, this brings us back to 1949, when Ben Davis Jr., who was a black communist, had been elected to the New York City Council, supplanting Adam Clayton Powell, but then was unceremoniously ousted, then jailed, along with the persecution of his major financial donor, speaking of the late Paul Robeson, artist, activist, singer, etc. And the pro-socialist movement has been on the defensive and on the back foot ever since. Perhaps the ultimate meaning of Tuesday's election is that the pro-socialist forces have come roaring back into consideration.
You mentioned Mr. Mamdani, not only a socialist, but a Muslim in the city with the largest Jewish population outside of Tel Aviv. Uh, that is, I think, another data point. But to the point of Donald Trump, his response was, and I heard him say this, well, this really is no reflection upon me because I wasn't on the ballot. To which I would say, well, no, you're right. You weren't on the ballot as a person, but your persona was on the ballot. And that this is a direct statement that people don't like you or your policies.
You are correct, but once again, a cautionary note.
Mm-hmm.
On the New York Times website, as we speak, is an op-ed that suggests that Trumpism, irrespective of setbacks, will be with us for some time to come. And I agree with that. And given the aforementioned point that Trumpism does not tend to respect defeats, witness once again, January 6, 2021,
Mm-hmm.
and given the fact that if you look at their ultimate project, which in my estimation is fascism, the problem with implanting fascism is that it does not necessarily command a majority, which means if you go back to the fascist projects of the 1930s, they have to engage in a blitzkrieg, a lightning war, in order to prevail. Or as Mr. Steve Bannon put it, Mr. Trump's former erstwhile counselor, they have to flood the zone.
Right.
And so that will be haunting this country for some decades to come, which is once again why I counsel that we should uncork the champagne bottles, but only sip, not guzzle the champagne.
Another element about Virginia, again, that I haven't heard a lot of analysis of, and if you've heard more of this, then please correct me. Diversity. Trump and his minions, his acolytes, his swamp monster friends, vehemently against diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in Virginia, that was one of the most diverse campaigns that I think I've ever seen in my entire life. You've got Abigail Spanberger, a white woman, running against Winsome Earl Sears, a Jamaican American female. So you had two women running to be governor, or woman one. You had State Senator Ghazala Hashmi, an Indian American immigrant, running to be the lieutenant governor against a white gay male, and Indian and Muslim. She's Indian and Muslim. You had, as you mentioned, Jay Jones, African American, running against a Cuban, the son of Cuban immigrants. So this was an incredibly, incredibly diverse campaign across the board, and I don't think that has gotten the attention that that it needs to get. Dr. Horne.
Well, Republicans talk out of both sides of their mouth, or to put it another way, with a forked tongue. That is to say, like the notorious lawyer who goes into court and says, Your Honor, my client is innocent, but he won't do it again, for example. And so the Republicans, they talk this game against diversity to put the opposition on the back foot. but then they pursue it relentlessly. I mean, what's the import of Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, for example? So,
Michael Steele.
oh, Michael Steele, the former lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, now a commentator on MS Now or MSNBC, for
Well,
example.
in fact, just quickly to that point of Michael Steele, what people may not remember is he was elected the chair of the Republican National Committee in response to the election of Barack Obama. And I can't remember how many ballots it took for them to elect him, but that was the primary reason they wanted to show diversity. Dr. Horne.
Well, to be sure, and much has been made, unfortunately, about the alleged totals that Mr. Trump was able to accumulate in the electoral column in 2024, a scant year ago. But if you look at the votes of Latinos in particular,
Mm.
they fled from the GOP. It may have had something to do with seeing their neighbors being rounded up by jackbooted thugs en masse. And of course, this recent Supreme Court decision penned by Brett Kavanaugh that suggested that reasonable suspicion of your being in this country illegally could be speaking Spanish, could be speaking with an accent, could be, quote, looking Latino, unquote, whatever that may mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear to me. And so perhaps that shift away from the Republicans will be long term. I'm afraid to say only time will tell.
To your point, Passaic County, New Jersey. I think Donald Trump won Passaic County. That's a heavily Latino uh, electorate in Passaic County, New Jersey. I want to say he received 43% of the Latino vote in the last election, and then Mikey Sherrill won by 15 points. There was a dramatic shift. And to your point also, Dr. Horne, not only um, looking Latino, but even if you're standing at a bus stop in work clothes with a tool bag, that is suspicion enough to be stopped by ICE and questioned and forced to show your papers. Racial profiling at its very worst. We're at 30 minutes. We're at 30 minutes past the hour. Dr. Wilmer Leon here, and Inside the Issues is where you are. Sirius XM 126 Urban View. Dr. Gerald Horne is my guest. His latest book, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Phenomenal, phenomenal work as always. And again, folks, as you're moving towards your holiday gift lists, this book, give the gift of intellect, give the gift of information, and gift Dr. Horne's book. What you're listening to right now, as we hit 30 past the hour, Ron Jack Ruba. This is from Gonzalo Rubalcaba's Skyline 2021 5 Passion Records release, and we lost Jack DeJohnette last Sunday. He is on this piece with that man, Ron Carter, on bass, and Gonzalo Rubalcaba on piano. Keep it locked right here, Sirius XM 126 Urban View. Thirty-four past the hour. Dr. Wilmer Leon here. Inside the Issues is where you are. Sirius XM 126 Urban View. That is Ron Jack Ruba from Gonzalo Rubalcaba's Skyline album. Ron Carter on bass, the late Jack DeJohnette on drums, Gonzalo Rubalcaba on piano. Dr. Gerald Horne is my guest. the capital of slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865, is his latest work. We're talking about the results of Tuesday's off-year elections. Dr. Horne, thank you so much for staying with me. Wanted to touch a little bit about Prop 50 in California. And I see two major outcomes, two major impacts here. First, this is the offset to Texas at the request of President Trump to find him five more House seats out of Texas. And Virginia passed a similar bill, which they have to then revote on when the next session convenes in January, I believe. And also, what does this mean for Gavin Newsom's 2028 presidential bid? So first off, Prop 50 in California. Californians have agreed to temporarily suspend the independent commission that draws district maps, and they've agreed to suspend it, I think, for a year and a half or 2 years, again, to offset Texas. Your thoughts there, Dr. Horne?
Well, it's also a defeat for former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who campaigned against Prop 50. It's a defeat for Charlie Munger, who is the son of a partner of Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, a billionaire, by the way. He also campaigned against Prop 50. It's not only a victory for Gavin Newsom, who is polishing his credentials as we speak by traveling to Brazil for the COP30 meeting on climate change, but in some ways, it represents a further victory for his mentor. Speaking of former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, who some decades ago pushed and promoted not only Gavin Newsom, but Kamala Harris, by the way. And of course, it'll be quite striking, given the fact that Kamala Harris has suggested that she's not done yet, to see both of them competing for the Democratic nomination in 2028. It also puts pressure on J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, to act in a similar fashion. That is to say, to accumulate more Democratic seats in the land of Lincoln. But already there's grumbling downstate in Illinois, which is heavily Republican. And just as in Oregon, we cannot rule out these secessionist efforts, that is to say, efforts by conservative parts or red parts of blue states to secede altogether. Somehow, I don't see that happening, but we shall see. But in any case, it also puts pressure on Governor Wes Moore of the state of Maryland, who also has been touted as a presidential aspirant. I understand that he has been balking, but perhaps Newsom's victory will cause him to change his mind.
I believe that to the issue to Wes Moore, that he has at least agreed to a commission to study the issue. I think. I think I read that. So the absolute no has become a, well, let's look at this. And so and let's use that to transition to Gavin Newsom, because love him, hate him, like him, despise him, whatever box you want to put him in, you have to respect the what it took. I mean, he was able to get this on the ballot in about a month, maybe a month and a half, got it to pass. So when you look at the politics that he was able to engage in, again, love him, hate him, despise him, whatever, you've got to respect that was some political gangsterism that he was able to pull off, and that to me can only bode well for him as we look towards 2028.
To be sure. And of course, he has a few skeletons in his closet.
Yes, he does.
With regard to his former spouse, Kimberly Guilfoyle, a former fiance of Donald Trump Jr., now ambassador to France, an affair he had with the partner of a close campaign aide, for example. But look at Bill Clinton, Look at Donald Trump. They've been able to overcome worse scandals, particularly Mr. Trump. But we all know that there's a different standard for conservatives than for the rest of us.
Is the term picadillo, is that appropriate here? Or picadillos? Um, in Virginia, beyond Abigail Spamberger and the others, the Virginia Democrats managed to increase their majority in the Virginia House of Delegates by 13 seats. And in Virginia, they went to a Howard Dean 50 state strategy, contesting every seat in every district in the Commonwealth. This is the first time, again, of my recent memory that where in Virginia there were districts where Republicans used to run unopposed. They fought every inch, every district for every seat, and resulting in a 13 seat swing. Well, actually a 12 seat swing because they had a 1 seat advantage before. Um, does that send a signal to you there, Dr. Horne?
Oh, certainly, because what that strategy does, it forces the GOP to expend resources in districts that formerly they did not have to expend resources in, which means that there is only a finite amount of dollars that they can expend to their detriment. I should also say that in the Cavalier state, Virginia in particular, this government shutdown, now heading towards 40
Yes.
days plus,
Yes.
has had a devastating impact on the Cavalier state, just like it's had a devastating impact in neighboring Maryland, for example. So, in that context, this result is not that shocking, particularly when we consider that a disproportionate percentage of the electorate in the Cavalier state is actually in Northern Virginia, a stone's throw away from the District of Columbia.
So, with these seemingly disparate ideological messages, in New York, a 34-year-old Muslim Democratic Socialist not only defeats the Republican opposition candidate Curtis Schlewa, but as a Democrat, Mamdani had to run against his own party as Cuomo, a party stalwart, challenged him as a cloaked independent. Trump even urged New Yorkers to vote for Cuomo. Virginia elects a former CIA analyst, and the outcome in New Jersey. So, just as examples, so going forward, how do Democrats, a party that on a good day seemingly can't construct a message, let alone stay on message, how do they construct a narrative going forward? The biggest question for me for them is how do they get out of their own way?
Well, the way will be parted for them to a certain extent, because one of the lessons from this election is that you do not necessarily have to be pro-Zionist in order to prevail. I trust that Speaker in waiting Hakeem Jeffries has absorbed that lesson. Certainly, he can count, and he recognizes that in the previous primary election, Mr. Mamdani won his district by 12 points, and already there has been rumblings and grumblings in that Brooklyn district about challenging Mr. Hakeem Jeffries for that seat, which of course brings us to the freakout that's taking place in Israel with regard to Mamdani's victory and his pledge to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, if he sets foot in Manhattan. This has led also to a freakout within the pro-Zionist community. Recall Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith already starting a so-called Mamdani monitor, where people can report episodes of so-called anti-Semitism perpetrated by the incoming Mamdani administration, which was contested by all people by Joe Scarborough of Morning Joe, which was really quite astonishing. But I think what this indicates is that we may be living through a transition moment. Mr. Mamdani did not win the Jewish vote in the city of New York. Historically, there are those who have suggested that progressive movements and left-leaning movements have had a disproportionate percentage of Jewish Americans in the vanguard. Uh, this New York City race shows that that principle may no longer be operative as well. And so we, as Mr. Mamdani said, quoting Eugene Debs, the late socialist leader who ran for president from behind prison walls more than a century ago, we may be at the beginning of a new dawn.
You know, you mentioned the Greenblatt um, Scarborough interview on Morning Joe. I saw that, and to Joe Scarborough's credit, as Greenblatt, as Joe Scarborough called it, blurred lines. He Greenblatt was talking about Mamdani, and then starts talking about all of these attacks against uh, Jews across the United States and synagogues and Jewish community centers, and he was inferring that Mamdani was somehow tied to, behind, supported, encouraged, facilitated, whatever you want to say. And Scarborough said, wait a minute, Jonathan. He said, you and I are friends and you've been on this show a long time. He said, but you're blurring a lot of lines here. Are you saying that Mr. Mamdani is behind this? And Greenblatt, oh goodness, no. And he clutched his pearls. Oh no, I had nothing. I was not trying to infer that, blah, 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 blah. And then Scarborough said, well, why don't you sit down and talk to the man? And Greenblatt said, well, he has stated publicly that he won't meet with me, which is a lie because I looked it up. And what Mamdani has said is, I will not seek a meeting with Jonathan Greenblatt because Jonathan Greenblatt does not represent the best interests of the Jewish community in New York. So basically, Mamdani is saying, Jonathan Greenblatt, who in the hell are you? And why should I talk to you or the horse you rode in on? So I found that whole exchange to be very interesting.
Well, it's quite curious, is it not? The Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith made an apologia for Elon Musk after he was captured on film, giving a Sieg Heil and a
Mm-hmm.
Nazi salute, for example. It's also curious that another particularly titanic struggle is unfolding as we speak within the MAGA base. I'm speaking of the clash between the white Christian nationalists on the one hand,
Mm-hmm.
who are represented in a sense by Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, who provided him with a platform, speaking of the Holocaust denier, or as his opponents say, the Hitler is cool portion of the GOP. And then there's the Zionist base, the Adelson family, billionaires, Bill Ackman of Manhattan, another billionaire, helped to dislodge Claudia Gay, the first Black woman president of Harvard, on spurious and ludicrous grounds. I'm not sure if that rift can be repaired. That particular coalition between white Christian nationalists who have more than a scintilla of anti-Jewish fervor embedded in their ranks, I'm not sure if they'll be able to bridge the gap that has emerged with regard to this other faction. In fact, if you look at the Wall Street Journal this morning, they're talking about how the Heritage Foundation, recall that Project 2025 is the playbook for the Trump regime. Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, made an apology in defense for Tucker Carlson, which has led to resignations from the ranks of the Heritage Foundation. Presumably funders and donors are heading for the exits as well. So it's possible that this Trumpist base might be in a state of disrepair.
Still sticking with New York, when I opened my computer yesterday, I have a MSN feed, and there was a story in the MSN feed, and the headline is as follows: Black leaders warn of Mamdani's New York proposals. This is from the Columbus Ledger Inquirer. which I've never heard of. I don't know if it's Columbus, Georgia, Columbus, Ohio, Christopher Columbus. I have no idea. But it was in my MSN feed, so that got my attention. Quote, the National Black Empowerment Action Fund has warned against New York City Democratic Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani and the Democratic Socialists of America, claiming their policies could harm African American communities. Founder Darius Jones argued that DSA proposals threaten community safety and hinder progress for Black New Yorkers. So I'm looking at this, and Black leaders, who in the hell are they talking about? So I looked up the National Black Endowment Action Fund because I've never heard of it. And it's a Black-led advocacy organization focused on the economic, educational, and social uplift of Black communities across the country. Founded by, wait for it, wait for it, AIPAC veteran Darius Jones. And it plans to invest in political campaigns and mobilize local officials. So here we have an AIPAC-backed entity infiltrating our community and our politics, warning us about Zohran Mamdani. So I looked up Darius Jones, since he's listed as a Black leader. I don't know who he's leading. He served as the Deputy National Political Director for Bloomberg's 2020 presidential campaign. His job was he was the African American community outreach guy. And before that, he spent a decade as the National African American Constituency Director for who? Wait for it. AIPAC. And then there's one other guy that belongs to this organization. His name is Richard St. Paul. He's an attorney in New York. And what does he also do? He serves on the National Council for AIPAC. Folks, there are spies in our midst. Dr. Horne, I told my students yesterday, as political science students, they've got to be incredibly discerning readers. You can't take things on face value. Dr. Gerald Horne.
And of course, AIPAC, for those who may not be aware, is at the apex of the Israeli lobby, for example. And as you know, Hakeem Jeffries, who is also close to the Israeli lobby, has been dubbed AIPAC Shakur. Well, I think that Mr. Jones might want to claim that ignominious nickname. But it also
and don't forget Gregory Meeks, and don't forget who's the Robbie, who's the other guy? There's another congressman from New York with a
Richie Torres.
Richie Torres.
He's the most notorious of all, of course.
There you go.
And it's very curious because the template was formed by the late Bayard Rustin, who was an aide to Dr. King after the White House forced Dr. King to get rid of many of his left-wing counselors, including the late, great Jack O'Dell.
Who used to be a regular on this show.
Exactly. And of course, the Obamas produced this Hollywood blockbuster about the life of Bayard Rustin, which swept under the rug many of his transgressions, but then led to stardom for the man who played Bayard Rustin, speaking of Coleman Domingo. And I think that all of this points to the uphill climb that we're going to have to traverse, even in light of the startling victory this past Tuesday.
And I just want to reiterate, we've got to be incredibly discerning readers. We have to be incredibly discerning listeners. We can't take these types of headlines on face value. If you don't know who the organization is, look it up. If they mention a leader, a so-called leader, and you've never heard of this leader, look him up. And what you'll find is some incredibly nefarious tentacles that are supporting this whole narrative. And if you follow it blindly, you do so at your own detriment, Dr. Horne.
Well, what's happening, and this oftentimes happens historically, is that folks are buying tickets for a journey on the Titanic,
Mm,
just as is about to go under the lapping ocean waves. It's very difficult to discern when history makes a turn. And I think that we're living through potentially one of those moments as we speak.
hmm
And I think that's one of the reasons why at the last moment, Hakeem Jeffries decided to endorse Mr. Mamdani for mayor of New York City. But Chuck Schumer did not do so. And I think that this will redound to his detriment, particularly when he's up for reelection, when Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez
hmm
of, of Queens and the Bronx is threatening to run against him.
And I said when I introduced you here in Silver Spring that I talked about the epochs, and usually it's only upon reflection that you realize that a moment you were in was a moment. And to your point, I say we're in that moment now. And this is one of those rare instances where you can look around you and see you are in one of those moments. I'll let you wrap it up for us, Dr. Horne.
We certainly are, but just to resuscitate a point made a few moments earlier, these opponents that we face do not surrender or give up easily.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, once again, to reiterate, as Steve Bannon has suggested, they need to put their foot on the gas. Otherwise, this Republican cabal will face the dim and glum prospect of mass imprisonment by 2028, 2029. And I think Mr. Bannon has a fair point.
Dr. Joe Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your flexibility today. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And as always, Gerald, look forward to having you back.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, man, thank you for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.